are well in every sort of way. I mentioned your evening prayers before I started speaking last time. I'd also like to remind you that it's not the only time to pray at night. As you're falling asleep, it's nice to say the prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, or Rejoice, Virgin Theotokos, Mary full of grace, the Lord is with thee. And if you wake up during the night, it's also a time you can pray. Again, no prayer is ever lost. So we were speaking about the second article of the Creed and the person of Christ, that he is God, and that about the Incarnation establishing a new relationship between God, a relationship not of legal servitude, but of familial love. Today, I would like to look a little more closely at our confession of the Incarnation, and in particular, our confession of the virgin birth of the most pure, ever Virgin Mary, the Mother of our God, and the Mother of us all who call upon his all-holy name. The virgin birth is what takes humanity from the tired world of the Old Testament and introduces it to the miraculous incorruptibility of the New. It's what makes the descent of heaven to earth a reality with flesh and blood. It's what makes communion with God possible on a level beyond anything the daughters of Eve and the sons of Adam could have imagined. The virgin birth is the hidden proclamation of the prophets, the secret expectation of the righteous, the unconcealed sweetness of the angels, the indomitable courage of the martyrs, and the cherished delight of monastics. Yet many Christians pay little attention to it and pay even less regard to the integral role it plays in our human condition and in our salvation. The virgin birth introduces an entirely new way of being in the world. According to St. Maximus the Confessor, the virginity of Mary in relation to the incarnation of Christ is not accidental. It has real anthropological and theological import. In order to properly comprehend this, it's necessary to briefly explore what St. Maximus taught about pleasure and about pain. For him, both pleasure and pain as we experience them today were not a part of God's original intention. Humanity was meant to experience delight from God, from communion with God. In the fall, the eyes of the spiritual heart, or nous, were misdirected downward towards sensual creation and away from the uncreated that should have been the focal point of our attention and of our desire. When man sought ultimate pleasure in created things rather than in the uncreated, pain was a natural consequence. Since the time of the fall, pleasure and pain have been inextricably linked, with pain being allowed by God to redirect the human mind to its proper end beyond this vicious cycle. In other words, to redirect us to the God of our heart. If you think about the observations of St. Maximus, you may recognize the depth of his insights regarding pleasure and pain. For example, the joy a married man and woman sense in collaborating with God and creating a new human life is mingled with the pain of childbirth. The pride and joy of witnessing the wedding of one's daughter is mingled with the pain of loss at her departure. This commingling of pain and pleasure observed by St. Maximus is borne out by experience to our present day. There's no escaping it. Commenting on this teaching of St. Maximus, Metropolitan Hierotheos Vlakos notes, therefore, pleasure precedes pain, since all pain is caused by pleasure, and this is why it is called natural pain. For Adam and Eve, pleasure was without cause, that is, it was not preceded by pain, while pain, which is a natural consequence of pleasure, is an obligation, a debt paid by all men who have the same human nature. This is what happened to Adam and Eve. For their descendants, things, however, are a little different. The experience of pain leads them to the enjoyment of pleasure. After the fall and the entry of the law of sin and death into his existence, man is in a tragic state because even though pain reverses pleasure and annuls its active movement, man cannot reverse and eliminate the law of death which is found within his being. And here lies the tragedy of man, who may cure pleasure and obtain inner balance through voluntary pain, in other words, through asceticism, and also through involuntary events, such as external grief and death, but he's unable to liberate himself from pain, which is a term determined by the law of death. This is precisely where the importance of the virgin birth in the history of our salvation can be seen. Unlike all other human beings born after the fall, the birth of Christ was not punctuated by pain. The virgin birth was an entirely different order, for the Lord Christ was incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary. Man was in an impossible state, unable to escape the quagmire of pleasure and pain. God had to intervene on his behalf. Again, Metropolitan Hierotheos Vladyka explains, it was absolutely impossible for human nature, which had fallen to voluntary pleasure and involuntary pain, to return to the formal state of paradise, had the Creator not become man. The mystery of the Incarnation lies in the fact that Christ was born human, but the beginning and cause of his birth was not sensual pleasure, for he was born of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary, outside the human way of generation, and he embraced pain and death by his own free choice. For man, pain came as a result of sin. It was involuntary. While for Christ, who was born without sensual pleasure, pain was received by choice. Jesus Christ, in assuming human nature, voluntarily takes on what was thrust upon us involuntarily, namely, pleasure and pain. In the virgin birth, devoid of sensual pleasure and pain, the foreshadowing of our true destiny can be seen. The virgin birth gives us a glimpse of what the Lord Christ wrought for us in his death and resurrection, namely, salvation that will free us from the dialectic of pleasure and pain. What would it mean if belief in the virgin birth were the core belief influencing behavior, thought, and feeling? First, it would mean that pure attention towards God remains willingly outside of the enticement of pleasure and the threat of pain. That would be a cardinal virtue that would inspire Christian heroism. The realization that such a state can lead to something wonderful, something holy, and something new would make adopting the commandments of Christ and following the straight and narrow to be a joy and to be an adventure. Second, it would mean that virginity and fertility would become categories that would characterize our choices in life, entailing a sense of being set aside for God on the one hand, and a sense of being generous in offering ourselves to the world around us on the other. We would strive to be like the wise virgins who kept the oil of virtue, love, and compassion in their vessels. Third, we would see that being Christians and Christ bearers calls us to unify the best of all worlds, prayer and service, theory and action, heaven and earth. St. Nikolai of Zicha sums up the significance of confessing Christ, incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary, in this way. Every wisdom in heaven and on earth is begotten of the Virgin and the All-Holy Spirit. What the chastity of the Father is in heaven, the virginity of the Mother is on earth. What the action of the Holy Spirit is in heaven, so is his action on earth. What the beginning of the wisdom is in heaven, the beginning of wisdom is on earth. O my soul, my eternal surprise, what happened once in heaven and once on earth must happen to you. You must become a virgin so that you can conceive the wisdom of God. You must become a virgin so that the Spirit of God may fall in love with you. May God bless and keep you all. Amen.